Now, here's the deal. What a great group. You know, and as Elizabeth said, we all have a piece of this. We're all touching the same kids, and they're kind of going in and out among the systems in a way that we hope we're making a difference and that's actually integrated. But the fact of the matter is that for the most part, we're kind of doing it like the blind man and the elephant. You know, each of us has a piece of it, and we can describe the piece that we have. What's difficult is actually bringing all of that together into a whole. And that's the challenge that we all face. The other problem is that the number of kids that we're actually serving is increasing. And when you put that together with the declining demographics of the number of young people, you would say, well, wait a minute, that sounds like a paradox. No, here's the thing. The number of young people are decreasing in relation to the number of old people, but the number of young people are getting more severe. Is anybody noticing that? You know, it's like, okay, so the kids that are coming to school today have many more challenges than those kids that we had, you know, 10, 20 years ago. And the kids that are coming into your social systems are also the same way. And part of that is because we have more stress in our environment. You know, the adverse childhood experiences story has told us that kids face stress and challenges that adversely impact the developing architecture of the brain, and it comes from many sources. We've long been familiar, for example, with substantiated cases of abuse and the impact that that has on children. And many more referrals are actually made to Child and Family Services every day. 5 times more referrals for maltreatment are made than the number who are actually placed. But substance abuse seems to be pervasive in our homes. Did you know that of those children who are actually removed from their home and put in foster care, that 80% of them are under the age of 6? And 80% of those are removed from a drug-endangered environment. Now, I don't know about you, but it just seems to me that if they were removed under the age of 6 from a drug-endangered environment, the parents probably did not start doing drugs once the child was born. They probably were doing that before the child was born, which means that the child was not only endangered in their environment, they were also endangered prenatally. When you couple toxic stress together with prenatal environmental exposures, you get a recipe for the change in the architecture of the brain that will ever set the trajectory of that child's life. We know that 1 out of 5 children, for example, are exposed to partner violence in the home. That's 20% of our population. Partner violence has as much effect in terms of the stress-provoking symptoms on a child as if the child were experiencing the physical abuse directly themselves. And that's 1 in 5. We also know from the Adverse Childhood Experiences study that it's not just the typical forms of abuse. Things like physical, sexual, psychological abuse and neglect. It's also household dysfunction. Things like alcoholism, loss of a parent, imprisonment, depression of a mother. They all have a lifelong impact. And what the Adverse Childhood Experiences study shows us, that is if a child is exposed to more than 3 of these forms, not the number of occurrences, we're talking about the forms of maltreatment. If a child is exposed to more than 3 of these forms of maltreatment, they're significantly more likely to be at risk for not only psychological problems later on in life and mental health disorders, but also engagement in at-risk behaviors like multiple sex partners and increase in STDs. And in addition to that, they're also much more likely to die of physical health problems, autoimmune disorders, emphysema, cardiac problems. All of those are related to the number of adverse childhood experiences that a child has prior to the age of 18. When you look at it like this, it becomes pretty discouraging. Because if I show you California's ratio, you can see that 17% of the population has 3 or more of these adverse events in their experience. That's higher than national statistics. And the poor get hit even harder with fewer resources to be able to help them. We wind up with children who come out of homes of poverty. 1 out of every 5 have an ACE score of 4 or more. What does that look like for us? I mean, we see this early on. The change in the architecture of the brain, the change in the neural pathways, the change in the chemical releases that we have in the brain causes these children to come to school anxious, acting out, trying to gain control over their environment, and that results in behavior problems that are recognizable early on. Research shows that about 10 to 15% of all typically developing preschool children have significant behavior problems. Maybe that's the reason why 3 times more preschoolers are expelled than what you have in kindergarten through 12th grade. For children who have a significant behavior problem at the ages of 3 and 4, they have a 50-50 chance of continuing those problems well into adolescence. And by the time they reach school, 1 out of 5 have a significant mental health disorder that is adversely impacting their ability to participate in school and to make wise life choices. Among children of poverty, it's half again as high as that. So, is it any surprise to us then that there is a direct connection between these early appearing behavior problems and juvenile gang membership and violence later on? And in fact, if we don't catch this early, as Elizabeth was appealing to us, the time for intervention is the earliest of ages and the earliest of stages. We know that these kids are there. We see them in our communities. We see them in our schools. The problem is we are immobilized in terms of action for referral. And if we don't catch them early by the age of 9, buckle your seatbelt and ride it out, because that window of opportunity to actually change those neural pathways and redirect that behavior is pretty much past. If we go past age 9, as adolescents, they're much more likely to engage in substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, smoking. They're much more likely to drop out of school, to be suspended or expelled. The foster care population is, of course, a titration of all of those forms of maltreatment that we showed you. They wind up with more than most of us would like to recognize in terms of the maltreatment. And so it's not surprising that for a foster child, by the time they hit 3rd grade, they've already repeated a grade, 80%. 50% of all foster children will never finish high school. 50% will experience homelessness at some point in their lives. You see the lifelong impact of this early trajectory and the reason why we need to do something early on? And I know that some of you are probably thinking, well, isn't there something that our social systems are doing where we're actually saving kids? I mean, that's the reason why we're in the business, is to try to capture these problems before they occur. That's the reason why I can say that 80% of those children who are under the age of 6 are actually, identified and removed from the home early on. It's because we're trying to help. We're trying to catch them early. But the statistics still show us that something's wrong. We're not doing it exactly right. We haven't found the magic answer, because 60% of children with emotional disturbance within 4 years of leaving high school have been incarcerated. Nearly 40% are on probation or parole. 75 to 93% of youth in the juvenile justice system have experienced trauma. 75% of all incarcerated adults in the nation, this is national statistics, have come out of the foster care system. And 80% of those currently sitting on death row. And yet, of all of those children, and in spite of our early identification of the need, what the research says is fewer than 1 in 5 will ever get the mental health treatment that they actually need. Now, you have to be saying, surely there are some examples where we're doing this right. Don't leave us on this depressing note. Let us know that there is some good that is coming out of all of the hard work that we're doing. And in truth, that's true. I mean, Alonzo Mourning of the Miami Heat, you know, Dave Thomas, founder, CEO of Wendy's, or Michael Oher of the Carolina Panthers. You have Tom Monahan, the founder, CEO of Domino's Pizza, or Steve Jobs, the creative genius behind Apple and Pixar Communication. All of these individuals came out of a system where the system touched their lives, whether abused or abandoned, whether neglected or reunited. They all passed through the system, and all would acknowledge, and did acknowledge, that their life path actually served as foundational element to make them stronger. They were resilient in the face of the difficulty. But the sad fact of the matter is, they're the exceptions. They're not the rule. And if they were the rule, there would be no need for us to be convening today. Now, Rick shared with you quickly some schemas, some schematics for how organizations are functioning. And this is the typical way that our agencies work together. We have strong communication. That's those lines between each of the agencies. We have strong communication among each other. We know each other by name, perhaps. We know who to call in order to make a referral, but every agency maintains their own independence. Their own independence in terms of their authority, their finances, the services that they provide, and their outcomes. We communicate well with one another. We know the services that another agency provides, and we know how to refer a child to that other agency so that they can get the services at the point of need. This is the common way that most of our agencies are functioning in the 56 counties in California. Now, some agencies have noted that the gap between agencies here is still extreme, and kids still fall through the cracks, and kids still don't get referrals at the time that they need it. And so they've made extraordinary effort to close those gaps and to make that process of transfer from one agency service to another much more seamless. And their organization looks like this. You can see now how those communication lines have been consolidated. When a child enters into one system, they become eligible for others. Now, they still maintain their autonomy in terms of authority, resources, services, and outcomes, but now their communication becomes much more blended, and the referral from one agency to another becomes much more seamless. And this is the hope of RAP. This is what RAP looks like. But if RAP worked, then why are we here? See, there's still problems even with this system where we seem to not be getting it correct. And so I would ask the question, if that system, if that model of care, if that's not working, then what? And there we're stuck. We've been asking the what question for a number of years. So much so now that people that were engaged in each one of those previous efforts have now kind of thrown their hands up and said, well, it just isn't doable. So let me kind of walk you through an exercise that would explain the reason why we're in the spot that we're in. Okay, so here you have 9 dots. Here's your job. I want you to connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines. Connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines. I'm going to give you just a few seconds to work on that. And you probably, if you talk with other people around your table, will find somebody who knows how to do this. Take a minute. 4 straight lines connecting all 9 dots. Oh. Oh, yeah, okay. So somebody just said, oh, yeah, there's one more rule. You can't lift your pencil off of the paper. Because I just had somebody do it with 3 lines, and they said, not a problem. Can't hear me? Can you hear me? Oh. Is that better? How's that? Is that better? Okay. All right. So now that I've given you a chance to experience frustration, for those of you that have seen this before, how many have seen this task before? Okay, many of you. All right. Let me ask you this. Was it easier because you've seen it before than the first time you did it? Yeah. And for those of you that haven't seen this before, here's how you do it. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, 4. And you go, wait a minute. That's, okay, so that's really simple. See, why weren't you able to do that to begin with? Because your brain put a structure on this problem that I did not give you. I told you that there was an array of 9 dots. Your brain said, there are 9 dots in a square, and I need to keep the square. Right? You made that up. Your brain made that up for you. See, all of us have these mental frames. They form the structure or the lens through which we view all of our environment. And because of that, they also form the structure through which we interpret the world. It's hard to break outside of the box. And this example is exactly where that little idiom comes from. Thinking outside the box. That's from this. How about this? Do you see 1 triangle or 2? Most people will say, I see 2 triangles. Actually, that second one, it's not there. Your brain made it up because of the structure, because of the context, because of the way that it appeared around it. What do you see here? An old woman with her big chin down into her fur coat? Or do you see the young lady very elegantly dressed with her face turned away, with the old woman's mouth now becoming the necklace around her neck? Do you see them? Or this. Is that a rabbit or is it a duck? Or both? Duck, rabbit, duck, rabbit, duck, rabbit. James Burke, in his wonderful PBS series called The Day the Universe Changed, framed it such as this. He said, that structure, your mental frame, evaluates, organizes, and explains every experience you have, intellectual or physical. It says what the whole of reality is. It provides your beliefs, judgments, morals, ethics, and values. That is pretty powerful, folks. So what about this? If you can see a Dalmatian in this picture, it's only because you already know what a Dalmatian looks like. If you didn't know what a Dalmatian looked like, it isn't that you would see something different. You would simply see nothing at all. Your brain would not be able to make any sense of it whatsoever. James Burke went on to say, it also provides the rule book about the kinds of questions you ask about the world because it provides you a theory about how things are supposed to work. So let's take a look at this. That's a beautiful piece. Maybe something that would go on a library shelf or, your coffee table, a wonderful conversation piece, right? This device is called an armillary. And other than being kind of gorgeous, it has absolutely no value whatsoever. That's because the armillary was a model of how the universe revolves around the Earth. The Ptolemaic view of how the universe is organized was the prevailing view of the universe for hundreds of years. And then along came that pesky Galileo and his silly invention called the telescope. And Galileo, by simply observing the universe, said, no, wait a minute, that's not the way it works. The universe doesn't revolve around the Earth. In fact, it's much more different than that. Now, we call this type of thing disruptive technology. It's a piece of technology that is interjected into our world that changes everything. Suddenly, the scales drop off of our eyes, and we're able to see new possibilities because something came in to jolt us out of that structure that our brain had created that also served as the lockbox for our thinking. It occurs not only in the physical sciences. Because your structure is so powerful in your brain, it occurs in everything around us. Anything involving human beings is going to involve this mental structure that keeps you stuck. So let me give you another example. 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. When the 1968 Olympics came around, the high jump was a big deal. And the ruling world champion at the time was a Russian by the name of Valery Brumel. Valery Brumel was an extraordinary athlete. He won the silver medal in the 1960 Olympics in Rome. He won the gold medal in the 1964 Olympics. And he was widely expected to win the gold in Mexico City as well. He had a graceful style. As he went over the bar, it just looked like it was seamless. He had hops to die for. He could kick a standard basketball rim, which is 10 feet high. So I'm seeing some of you people in here that are sports nuts and you're thinking, whoa, and I'm seeing other people in here that have absolutely nothing to do with your sports and you're going, and I get that. But you have to admit, that's beautiful form. That's called the Western roll. That was the way that you did the high jump in 1968. But in 1965, Valery Brumel was involved in a tragic accident that injured his leg, and he was unable to compete in the '68 Olympics. And of those 3 Americans who made the team and went to the Olympics, 2 did the Western roll, and the other one did not. That was Dick Fosbury. And Dick Fosbury decided that he would upset the sports world of high jump, and instead of going over gracefully face down facing the bar, Dick Fosbury went over backwards, head first, and facing up. It was such a radical idea that he was greatly ridiculed over doing it this way. In fact, the Medford Mail Tribune said, Fosbury flops over the bar. And in the storyline that followed, they said that it was like a fish flopping in a boat. And the caption underneath the picture says, world's laziest high jumper. Dick Fosbury won the gold in the 1968 Olympics, clearing the bar at 7 foot 4 1/4 inches. He was the only entrant in that entire Olympics who used this strategy for getting over the bar. In the 1972 Olympics, half of all those who competed used the Fosbury flop. Today, the world record holder for the high jump is a Cuban by the name of Javier Sotomayor, who cleared the bar at 8 feet. Now here's the thing. When you take a look at how Fosbury was ridiculed, by the way, no one does the Western roll anymore. Everybody uses the Fosbury flop. When you take a look at how he was ridiculed, it reminds me of the German philosopher Schopenhauer's statement when he said, all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as being self-evident. You know, isn't that what we go through in our lives as well? We try a new idea and everybody just goes, that'll never work, that'll never work. And we feel so foolish that we would even think about trying. Oh, did I suggest that? I'm sorry. But it's only if you think outside the box that you actually get there. Here's Javier Sotomayor. Cleared the bar at 8 foot 1/4 inch. What's he doing? Fosbury flop. Now, you're all thinking, okay, enough with the sports metaphors. No, here's the thing. Would it surprise you to know now that neither Valerie Brumell nor Dick Fosbury were the first to clear the high bar at 7 foot 4 inches? That actually happened 14 years earlier, in 1954. And the gentleman that did it was Dick Browning. Dick Browning was a gymnast from the University of Illinois. He had amazing hops. He was a gold medalist in terms of the floor exercise, and it was observed that he got such height as a result of his efforts that somebody thought, I wonder how high he's actually going. And so they invited Dick Browning to come over to the gym in the middle of the night, and a look photographer showed up, and he set up a strobe light, and he turned all of the lights out in the entire gym, and he asked Dick Browning to clear the high bar, and he did it. And they captured it on film. And it looked like this. Can you imagine the difficulty, first of all, of trying to jump over a 7 foot 4 inch bar in the dark with a light flashing? What he did was he used a simple round off to a back handspring. He not only cleared the bar in the same way that Fosbury did, going over on his back, he also landed on a hardwood floor, for crying out loud, feet first. I'm impressed by that. I think that's pretty cool. And you're thinking, what in the world does that have to do with the reason why we're here today? Because you have to know what your goal is. If the goal is to clear the bar, this is the way to do it. Browning went on to say, they never even tested me to how high I could actually go. At the time that he cleared 7 foot 4 inches, he broke the existing world record by 9 inches. 1954. He was in the Guinness World Book of Records until 1972, not as a high jumper, but as the highest jumping gymnast. You know, Guinness does that. They break everything down into very small pieces. Like, okay. But they never tested him to see whether or not he could jump higher, and he always believed that he could. Sometimes we find that we are trying to design systems for a goal when that really isn't the actual goal. Do you know why he never was entered into the record books as a high jumper? Because there's rules about high jumping. You have to take off on 1 foot, not on 2. And Browning, in this routine, took off from 2 feet. Now, I thought the goal of high jump was to clear the bar as high as you could go. Evidently, that's not it. There is rules that you have to abide by. You have to clear the high bar, but oh yes, you have to take off on 1 foot first. How are we constrained in that way? We think we know what the rules are. Well, we need to serve all kids. Well, of course you need to serve all kids. Everybody's about that. You got to serve all kids. But you can't share information with one another. Oh no, you can't do that. You got to serve all kids without anybody knowing what that kid's doing and what's in his life. Oh, and you can't mix funding. No, you can't do that. You know, if you mix funding, I mean, my goodness, the funding police are going to come down and they're going to do an audit, and then they'll take away the funding for all the kids. And because you had a bleeding heart for one child, now you can't serve 20 kids. You see how it goes? We need to clarify the rules if we're going to solve this problem. Sometimes, though, you just have to try another way. Galileo said it this way. He said, all truths are easy to understand once they're discovered. The point is you have to discover them. And sometimes you have to look at different ways of being able to get there, because the fact of the matter is that many of our greatest discoveries, you didn't just jump there, they were incremental. They built one piece at a time. Elizabeth talked about how we got this work started. It got started with a simple conversation. Couple people talking about, oh, wouldn't it be good? Oh, I know somebody else, and that's the way it got started. Most things are exactly in that way. And so as agencies began to gather together and they saw a common need and they said, how can we better serve that population? They carved out a niche and they began to focus just here. We can't do all of it, but let's just do this piece. This is a story of how Desert Mountain SELPA became Desert Mountain Children's Center and started serving children 0 through now 22 as a result of a contractual partnership with the Department of Behavioral Health. And now they operate one of the largest mental health centers under the umbrella of schools for school-aged children. We have representatives from them here today that you can hear from. But the way that they did it is this way. They have joint authority over that program. It's a mental health clinic that's under the authority of the Department of Behavioral Health, but all the staff are hired by the schools. So they have common enrollment. When you come into the clinic, you need mental health services. You're not only enrolled in the school environment, you're also enrolled in the mental health environment. And oh, by the way, Department of Public Health came to the table and they said, if you put up $25 on the or 25 cents on the dollar, we'll match it with matching federal dollars, and we'll give you a public health nurse, and they can do the home visitations. And First 5 came to the table, and they said, and we'll offer money so you can hire a pediatrician and a neuropsych. See, agencies began to come together, and why? Because they were looking at one small niche. This piece, right here. We're not trying to do it all. We just carve out this one piece. And you're able to expand services when you do it that way. Einstein said it this way, you can never solve a problem on the level on which it was created. You have to do something different outside of that context if you're going to do it. And perhaps we're just way too close to the problem to be able to see it clearly. Maybe that's the difficulty that we're facing. There are many examples of agencies that gather together. We're not saying there's one way to do it. And in fact, I would say to you, there is not one way to do it. You didn't come here to be able to replicate a program that somebody else is doing. You came to get ideas so that you could create a program of your own that meets your local needs and with your resources and with your population, and that is very much serving your kids with those outcomes. That's the reason why you're here. No one has it nailed in terms of how to do this work. Margaret Mead put it this way. She said, if a fish were an anthropologist, the last thing it would discover would be water. We're so embedded in our system, our mental structure keeps us from being able to think more broadly than that. So let's look outside of ourselves, perhaps at the corporate world. In the corporate world, we're familiar with terms like mergers and spin-offs, and in the health field, we're familiar with words like capitation. Mergers where you have companies that join together and they form a brand new company out of two different companies because it's going to help them to do the job better. Or spin-offs where they take a division and they make it its own company because that way they can get more efficiency. Or capitation where you give a certain level of funding and out of that funding you have to serve them all. It's not only in the health world, that's the reason why schools are funded by ADA. You get a set amount of dollars regardless of the need of the child, and you have to serve them all with that allocation. Now, is there any way that we can take perhaps concepts like this and create a new paradigm for services to kids? Well, one possibility is something like this, where the agencies gather together, they identify a specific need, and now they spin it off as its own separate agency. They all contribute funding in terms of resources and services, but that third or that fifth agency, E here, it's its own agency. It's governed by the governance of each of the four previous agencies. So like a governing body, or maybe you form it as a joint powers authority, so it has joint governance. But they hire their own staff, they have their own resources, and they are responsible for meeting that need. Maybe that's something that we need to consider. Maybe not. See, the fact of the matter is, all of these things that I've showed you here, these are merely structures. And they will never be sustainable as long as we think that all we have to do is use this recipe of putting these different structures together in a different format, and voila, we're going to get the answer. It's like shuffling the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. The outcome is still going to be the same if that's the only thing that we're doing. Now, Michael Fullen, in his wonderful work, Change Forces with a Vengeance, said if you want to sustain change on a macro level over the long haul, you have to mobilize the social attractors. And those social attractors are identified as these: moral purpose, quality relationships, and quality knowledge. Moral purpose, quality relationships, and quality knowledge. Check this out. Who uses this the best? The military, folks. My son's in the military. When he went into the military, it was all about what? Immediately, the reason why we're doing this is a larger reason, more than yourself, a service ethic that is beyond you. One that is, they are so successful in instilling into the hearts and lives of 18-year-olds that they're willing to go into battle. That's how effective they are. And what do they have allegiance to? Service, core, God, country. The core. They don't want to leave a fellow behind. And before they go in, they're given all the very best knowledge about what to do in terms of the intelligence and how to handle that. See, these three elements have also been identified in Margaret Wheatley's work. In the wonderful work that she did, she said most times when organizations get together, they talk about these three things: the structure, the pattern, the process of how we're going to reorganize our organization. But if they want to sustain change over the long haul, they have to have a clear identity, a purpose outside of themselves for why they're doing this work. You have to be so connected to the needs of children in this regard, in this context, that you're willing to overcome any barrier in order to accomplish it. And you're not going to be able to do it alone. The only way that you're going to be able to do it is through those broad connections, through those relationships that you establish, through knowing that that other agency person will not let that referral that you just sent to them fall through the cracks. You know that they can trust, that they can be trusted. And also because you are very, very familiar with what's going on in your community. You have that quality information and you use those evidence-based practices to make sure that they're effective. If you do it this way, this purpose, the relationships, and that quality information will continue to sustain the structure, pattern, and process that is above the green line. George Marshall put it this way. He said, there is no limit to the good that you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. Most of the time, these efforts fail because they violate our territory, because they change the way that we think about our job, because they threaten to take away our power or our autonomy. We need to get past that. Margaret Mead said it this way: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That's our hope for us here in this room today. We have the power to be able to do that. There isn't any knowledge outside of this room that we need. Oh, we can't move that direction because we don't know this. No, we know it. It's here. The knowledge is in this room. The task for us now is to have the will and the moral purpose to move forward. So let's do the work.